I would like to go over some of the end-life symptoms that is being described in some blogs, websites, and YouTube video. And I would like to share that my mom herself has been having these symptoms for quite some time. And thankfully, my mom is still with me. So I would like to go through these symptoms and maybe discuss about certain ways that we can do to address. Perhaps some of these symptoms are really real life symptoms because this is what has been observed by medical profession, the caregivers, the nurses. At the same time, I would also like to share what can be done, especially in cases of Alzheimer who couldn't quite eat when they lose the ability to swallow. Let me go through one by one. First is incontinence. Incontinence will happen to old people, elderly people, especially sometimes for Alzheimer, because it may affect area of the brain. They lose ability of their bladder and bowel control. My mom had been on adult diapers for 2 years. So the adult diapers can solve the incontinence issue. She suddenly, actually it started before her condition actually deteriorate. She has the symptom of incontinence. That time she was going to the toilet on her own, right? And suddenly she will just lose it and she will be incontinent. But that was more than 2 years ago. And then after that, we placed her on Pampers. The second symptom is no appetite or refusal of food. Okay, that can be also an end-life symptom because as the body shuts down, they actually do not want to take in any more food because it actually taxes the system when we put food inside because the body, they are preparing with the dying process. But in the case of my mom, she also lost the appetite and she doesn't seem to want to eat. But that was actually not due to the dying process. It was actually due to she had dysphagia, whereby she lost her ability to swallow because of the progression of her Alzheimer's disease. It was not a dying process. So I know that in many countries, they treat it as an end of life process. Only in cases of Alzheimer, they do this. In cases of other illness, they'll put in a feeding tube. So in Thailand, the doctor here put in a feeding tube. They at that point when my mom was put in with a feeding tube, she was already severely dehydrated and malnourished. I didn't know that because she was still consuming as normal, but the doctor told me that the consumption she have is no longer enough to sustain her life. That you can see if let's say their diapers are hardly wet and they're hardly passing out anything, and they're not eating much, so you can see that the volume is not enough. That's why the body is hanging on to the fluid. That you have to take them to the hospital. So when my mother was fitted with a feeding tube, at first the doctor also was not very optimistic because her vitals doesn't look good. But with time, she gradually recovered back her strength and she was able, her digestion system worked just fine. Just for your information, dysphagia also exists in other medical, it's just an inability to swallow. So people like those cases like stroke, if it affects the swallowing process, motor neuron disease, certain kind of cancer, if the radiotherapy on the throat affects the swallowing, also they can't swallow. It doesn't mean that there is an end of life process. So if with the feeding tube and they are no longer absorbing food, means that when you put in little food, they start to throw up, then they are having problem eating and more investigation will have to be done. But otherwise, in the case of my mom, the feeding tube, eventually with feeding tube and she get the nutrition and hydration she need, she recover back her health. Another one is the cold limbs and hands, the extremity. That also can tie to the fact that they are not getting enough adequate fluid and intake. That's why their body is cold and somehow they're losing weight. If they're not getting enough nutrition, naturally they're going to lose weight. Naturally, there'll be less adipose tissue. And if let's say they are exposed to like aircon in the air conditioner room and we don't cover their up with socks and blankets, yes, the extremity may get very cold. because without sufficient nutrition, whatever available for blood flow, everything goes focused to the organ, so it causes the extremity to be cold. So if you have enough fluid intake uh, uh, and nutrition intake and enough hydration, and you cover them up with blankets at night, when it's cold at night, you may find that their limbs are no longer that cold. Another symptom is also they actually prefer to sleep more. My mother have this symptom for more than 2 years already. I would say like maybe about progressively started like about 6 years ago when she have liver cirrhosis, because the liver cirrhosis causes absorption. So that one is about 6 years, but the last 2 years with the feeding tube, now my mother is considered bedridden. Yes, she actually like to prefer to sleep more. You will hear that in this recording there are background noise. It's just my mom singing and humming to herself. That's why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to share that had it not be medical intervention, the compassionate medical intervention here, my mom wouldn't be with me today. So when I read the common symptoms, I actually find that, my mom have it too. That's why I want to share certain other possibility. Another thing is also with regards to Alzheimer, when they can't swallow and they're not eating, right? People report certainly there's a gurgling sound of phlegm and secretion and mucus. So that they thought that that's the end, Of course, this is what happens when you can't swallow secretion, when you can't swallow your own phlegm. As I mentioned earlier, the dysphagia is some Alzheimer patient develop this. And because the brain degenerates, so it affects the function of swallowing. If they can't swallow, of course the fluid, the mucus will build up in the lungs, they swallow into the lungs, and it just build up. And there will be a gurgling sound when the body try to get it out. That issue can be solved with phlegm suction. I've heard the gurgling sound many times. In fact, now I know how to hear the sound, because when the sound comes out, the moment I put in the suction tube, the phlegm will just suck out and it will be okay. So that gurgling sound, it's not an end of life thing. It can be a sign of pneumonia, as well as a sign of if a person have problem clearing their secretion, we have to do phlegm suction. And phlegm suction has to be deep phlegm suction. So you have to be taught by nurses who are good at doing it. You need to get a good phlegm suction machine, these disposable suction tubes, and then you need to do suction for them. Then it will help to solve the issue. It is just based on my experience of what my mom is having. It may be the end, but it may not necessarily be the end as well. Thank you for listening.